Hello everyone, it's Daniel from TechMind Factory. Welcome to this next video from the series called Implementing Secure Applications with Microsoft Azure. In this video, we are going to talk about secure access with Azure Role-based Access Control or Azure RBAC and Managed Identities. As always, let's start with the solution architecture diagram. As we can see, we have different kinds of Azure services here in the solution architecture. And important fact is that we have to enable secure communication between those services. So when we deploy our application to the Azure cloud, like for instance this Blazor application to Azure Web App or our APIs to Azure Containers apps, obviously we want to integrate with different kinds of Azure services. So for instance, we would like to retrieve the secrets and credentials stored in the Azure Key Vault. We would like to retrieve the configuration that is centrally stored in the Azure App Configuration. We would like to securely connect to Azure SQL database. And we'd like to securely connect to many different kinds of Azure services, to be honest. So in this specific scenario, we want to be sure that this communication is well secure. And obviously, you can think about using some connection strings or access keys or credentials. That's not actually the way to go. The proper way of implementing secure communication in the Azure cloud and control is to use Azure Role-based Access Control. So also Azure RBAC. So Azure Role-based Access Control or Azure RBAC is authorization system that helps you manage who has access to Azure resources like those I mentioned, like Azure Key Vault, Azure App Configuration, what they can do with those resources and what areas they have access to. So with RBAC, we have also a concept called Managed Identities. So Managed Identities let services like Azure Web Apps, Azure Containers apps, access resources like Azure Key Vaults, Azure Blob Storage accounts without requiring specific access keys or connection strings. And that's very important because typically from a developer perspective, when we start working with those Azure cloud services like Azure Blob Storage or let's say Azure App Configuration, probably we think like, okay, let's use some connection string, let's store it in the app configuration, and that's great. No, actually, there is a better way to implement secure communication between those services in the Azure cloud to use secretless communication, which is Managed Identities along with Azure Role-based Access Control. So let's talk about Managed Identities right now. So in the Azure cloud, we have two types of Managed Identities. We have System Assigned Managed Identity and we have User Assigned Managed Identity. Let's start with System Assigned Managed Identity. So basically, when it comes to System Assigned Managed Identity, this is Managed Identity that is created dedicatedly for a specific resource. So let's say that we have this Azure Web App we can see here on this slide. And for this Azure Web App, we enable System Assigned Managed Identity. So it means that this Managed Identity is actually connected and tied to Azure Web App. And now this Azure Web App has its own identity. So it means that we can securely, for instance, access Key Vault, access Azure App Configuration, Azure Blob Storage, and so on and so forth. Why? Because we can assign different kinds of RBAC roles to this Managed Identity. Important fact is that once the resource is deleted, like when we delete Azure Web App, System Assigned Managed Identity is also deleted. And another thing is that System Assigned Managed Identity cannot be shared among different kinds of services in the Azure cloud. So if you enable Azure Web App with System Assigned Managed Identity, the same Managed Identity cannot be used with Azure Containers apps, for instance. So on the other side, we have User Assigned Managed Identities. And now when we look at this specific diagram, we can see that we have multiple Azure services and there is one Managed Identity. So let me explain that really quickly. So User Assigned Managed Identity is standalone resource that you can create in the Azure cloud, and you can assign User Assigned Managed Identity to different kinds of Azure resources. So you can assign User Assigned Managed Identity to Azure Web App, and you can assign the same Managed Identity to Azure Container App. So the difference is that user assigned managed identity is standalone resource, while system assigned managed identity is connected to the resource. If resource is deleted, system assigned managed identity is deleted. In case of user assigned managed identity will remain even if we delete services that are using this managed identity. And again, we can assign different kinds of RBAC roles to user assigned managed identity. And then, for instance, we can securely access Azure App Configuration from our application hosted in the Azure Container App because of the fact that user assigned managed identity is enabled for this Azure Container App. So now, to put a simple example, we have Azure Container App. And let's say that we host our web API in the Azure Container App. And from this web API, ASP.NET Core API, let's say, we would like to securely access Azure Blob Storage and files hosted there. And we would like to upload those files securely to the Blob Storage. So obviously, from a developer perspective, you can think, hey, maybe should I use Azure storage account key or some connection string? But actually, there is a better way to do it. So we can enable user assigned or system assigned managed identity for Azure Container App. We can assign a specific RBAC role to this Azure Container App, like storage blob data contributor. And then we can enable this managed identity to securely access Azure storage account, to upload files to the blob storage and to read files from the blob storage. So actually what we do, we are granting permissions to this specific managed identity to access storage account securely without any secrets, connection strings, and account keys. Perfect. So now let's see it in action. Great. So here is Azure Portal and all the resources I created for this application solution. So now let's see how managed identities can be used along with RBAC roles to enable this secure communication between Azure Cloud Services. So the thing is that, as I mentioned, we can have user assigned managed identity or system assigned managed identity. So in this specific scenario, I will present both, but we will focus more on the user assigned managed identity in this specific scenario. But let me start with system assigned managed identity so you can see both in action. So this is my Azure web app where I host this Blazor client application. And under settings here, I have this tab called Identity. And as you can see here, I can select whether I want to use system assigned managed identity or user assigned managed identity. So in this specific scenario, as you can see, I enable system assigned managed identity for this application. Okay. So in this specific scenario, I have dedicated managed identity enabled for this application to securely communicate with other Azure services. I have object ID here, which is important. I will show you that in a minute. Let me copy this. But also I can enable user assigned managed identity. However, I don't want to do it. Let's focus on this. So once I enable system assigned managed identity, let's say that for any reason, I would like to access Azure Key Vault directly from Azure Web App. Okay, so instead of using any, like crazy things like connection strings, access keys, and so on, we want to use managed identities, so secretless approach. So when I access Azure Key Vault, under access control, I can assign different RBAC permissions. That's what I mentioned. So here I can click Add, Role Assignment, and on this tab, I can select the specific role that will be assigned to system assigned managed identity. So let's say that I will select Key Vault secret user. So I want to read secret contents. So I will select this RBAC role. And here, as you can see, I can either assign this role to specific user, group, or service principal, or manage identity. So here I will click manage identity and select members. And from there, I can decide whether it will be user assigned or system assigned managed identity. Okay. So in this specific scenario here, I will select all managed identities. And as you can see, here is my web app actually. So this is my managed identity for Azure Web App. If I select it here like this, it will be visible here. And as you can see, here is the object ID I used. As you can see, I can paste it here. This is the same object ID that was displayed on the managed identity tab in the Azure Web App. And now I can click review and assign. So I can assign this RBAC permission to this managed identity enabled for this Azure Web App. So then from the application source code perspective, I will be able to securely retrieve secrets from Azure Key Vault. So I will show you some of those integrations in the code in a minute. Perfect. So this is about the system assigned managed identity. However, as I mentioned, you can also utilize user assigned managed identity. So to create user assigned managed identity, you click create button, and here if you type manage identity, you can select system assigned managed identity, create, and obviously you can create new user assigned managed identity here, and you can select the resource group where it will be created, the region, the name, and once it's created, actually I created one here, as you can see. I created this system assigned managed user assigned managed identity. Sorry, so this is user assigned managed identity. It's created in this resource group, and now I can assign RBAC permissions to this managed identity. Where I use this managed identity, let me really quickly show you. So for instance, let's open Document API Container App here, and again, under settings here, if I expand this section, under identity, you can see that this time system assigned managed identity is set to off because I'm not using system assigned managed identity here. I'm using user assigned managed identity. So this is the managed identity I showed you. It's created in the same resource group. And now what I can do, let me show this example with Azure App Service, for instance, or Azure App Configuration. Here, let me find it really quickly. Here it is. I want to grant access from this Azure Container App with this user assigned managed identity to access configuration in the Azure App Configuration here. So I have this configuration explorer, as you can see. Here are my configuration parameters for the application. And now, again, under Access Control here section, I can click Add Role Assignment and do exactly the same thing as I did before. So as you can see here, I can select different roles. So app configuration data reader, in this case, to read app configuration from the Azure App Configuration. And again, here, I want to use manage identity, select members, but this time I want to use user assigned managed identity. And as you can see here, I have my managed identity. So I can select it from the list. It's here, perfect, and then I can click Review and Assign. So then my ASP.NET Core API that is hosted in this Azure Container App can utilize this managed identity to securely communicate with Azure App Configuration. Great, so that's it. In the next video, we are going to see how to integrate our application with Azure Cloud Services, not only using managed identities, but also how to securely communicate with Azure Cloud Services using our developer account. So we are going to see from the application source code and configuration how to avoid using any access keys, connection strings, secrets, and how to leverage this mechanism I showed you in this video. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.